Jessica and Brian were excited for their second baby. During the birth of their second child, a sudden emergency had doctors fighting to save both mother and the baby. The room was filled with the sound of the baby's cries as Jessica took her last breath. But in their darkest hour, Brian's unbelievable act left everyone speechless. Jessica and Brian had been married for almost 5 years. They loved their first child, Anna, who was 4 years old and full of curiosity and energy. They decided it was time to give her a sibling and start planning for their second baby. They talked about their hopes and dreams for their future child. They wondered if it would be a boy or a girl, what name they would choose, what color eyes and hair they would have. They had talked endlessly about whether they were having a boy or a girl, and Brian was determined to make the reveal something special. They imagined how Anna would react to having a new brother and how they would play together and learn from each other. Anna was excited to have a baby brother soon. On the day of the reveal, Brian took Jessica to a beautiful park where they had shared many happy memories. He had set up a picnic blanket and a basket full of Jessica's favorite snacks and drinks. As they sat together, Brian handed Jessica a small box wrapped in blue paper. Jessica opened the box to find a pair of tiny blue booties inside. She looked up at Brian and he smiled, nodding his head. It was a boy. Jessica's eyes filled with tears, and she threw her arms around Brian, thanking him for such a thoughtful and beautiful reveal. They sat together for a while, talking about all the adventures they would have with their baby boy. Anna had seen her mother's belly grow bigger and bigger over the months. She had felt the baby kick and move inside. She had even heard his heartbeat and seen his picture on the ultrasound. Everything seemed to be going well with the pregnancy, and the family eagerly awaited the arrival of their little boy. However, in week 39, something unexpected happened. That morning, Jessica started having a mild contraction. Since it wasn't yet that serious, she and Brian headed to the hospital, laughing on the way. When they got there, the doctor waited for the contractions to increase and broke her water. That's when everything changed. Well, for the worse. Jessica started feeling dizzy, complaining of feeling weak and nauseous. Nothing seemed to indicate anything was wrong. Then they realized how wrong they were. Right in front of them, Jessica closed her eyes and collapsed. Her heart rate slowed, and her blood pressure dropped to 0. As the seconds passed, she turned blue and could no longer breathe. And worse, as the baby boy had not been born, the baby's vital signs also began to drop. When Jessica's complexion shifted to a ghostly blue, the gravity of the situation gripped Brian's heart, taking his breath away. Time seemed to slow, and the world around him blurred. Suddenly, vivid memories flashed before him, almost like a montage of the life they had built together. Jessica and Brian had met during their first semester of college. Jessica loved visiting the local park after her college classes. One day, while enjoying her sandwich, a Boston Terrier named Max suddenly grabbed her sandwich and took off running. Brian, out of breath, caught up and managed to take the sandwich from Max, apologizing profusely. "He's a handful, isn't he?" Jessica laughed. "Yeah, he's a mischief maker," Brian replied, smiling. After that, they often met at the park, mostly because Max seemed to gravitate towards Jessica. They would chat, laugh, and slowly they became close friends. One day, with Max playing around them, Brian shyly asked Jessica out for a coffee. With a big smile, she agreed. They soon realized they were perfect for each other, and with Max by their side, their love story began. That chance encounter led to many more meetings at the park. Brian would often walk Max there, hoping to run into Jessica again. They would chat about their classes, their interests, and their dreams for the future. As their friendship grew stronger, Brian realized that he had feelings for Jessica. He invited her to a picnic in the same park where they had first met, and Jessica eagerly accepted. As they shared a meal together, Brian confessed his feelings, and Jessica blushed, admitting that she felt the same way. They got married in that same park, surrounded by their family and friends. They exchanged vows under the shade of a tall oak tree, with Max wagging his tail beside them. The memories of their initial encounters and the promise they made under that oak tree flooded back to Brian as he stood in the cold, sterile environment of the hospital. The beeping of machines and the murmurs of medical staff seemed a world away from the laughter and joy of that sunlit park where their love story began. Things were getting out of control, and the medical team knew they had to act quickly. They rushed her in for some tests. A scan showed she was suffering from an amniotic fluid embolism, a rare allergic reaction in which amniotic fluid enters the mother's bloodstream, and this causes the heart and lungs to shut down. While in the operating room, her condition worsened, and the doctors pronounced her dead, but they still wanted to save the baby. While the doctors were trying to save the baby boy, Brian was left outside, pacing around. They told him her condition was critical and that she would not survive. If she did, she would never be the same. This was all too much for Brian. He and his wife had spent the last few months waiting for the arrival of their baby, and suddenly, he had to say goodbye just like that. He felt helpless and frightened, yet he prepared himself to say goodbye. But he couldn't let her go without putting up a fight, and he did it the only way he knew how. All he could do was pray for her and their unborn child. In the hallway of the maternity ward, he had a strong urge to punch the walls until his fists bled. However, he decided to kneel down instead and leaned his head against the wall. He used all his might to speak to himself in a hushed tone. Then Doctor comes out of the aerating room. "What happened? Is everything okay?" Brian asked anxiously. "Jessica's condition has worsened and we need to deliver the baby immediately. It's the only way to save him," the doctor explained. The doctors rushed him into the delivery room where Jessica lay unconscious on the table. "Is she going to be okay? What about the baby?" Brian asked frantically. "We don't know yet. We need to focus on the delivery," the doctor replied. He got down on his knees and prayed the most heartbreaking prayer he had ever had to say. He said slowly, and while crying, "God, I know this is more than I can handle, which means you have a plan and a purpose in this, and I trust you. But please, let me hug my wife again." As the doctors tended to their son, Brian's attention turned to Jessica. He held her hand tightly, whispering words of love and encouragement, praying for a miracle. The doctors are working hard, but the situation looks dire. Suddenly, Jessica's vital signs flatline, and the doctors pronounce her dead. Brian's world fell apart. He was numb with shock and grief, unable to comprehend how he would live without her. Brian watched in awe as the medical team worked tirelessly to deliver their son, tears streaming down his face as he heard his baby's first cries. The doctors leave the room, leaving Brian alone with Jessica's lifeless body. He then contacted his family and friends, and those nearby rushed to the hospital. While everyone waited in silence, Jessica was in the operating room and doctors were struggling to revive her. Out there, Brian still didn't know if his wife would be able to see the precious baby boy she had just had. He had long heard of bittersweet experiences, but only now did he understand what that meant. He was more than happy for his little boy, but he also feared for the life of his beloved wife. He drops to his knees, begins to pray, and then his voice trembled as he addressed the heavens. "God, why? Why her? I trust in your plans, but please grant her another chance at life. Please fight Jessica if you still have some strength." The room was silent except for the heart-wrenching sobs of a man broken by grief. Brian did touch her somewhere deep inside, and a tear trickled down her eye. When the doctors saw her, they were stunned. And suddenly, Jessica's body jolts, and she takes a deep breath. An intense gasp of air rushed into her lungs, her chest heaving with the force of it. She opened her eyes and looked around, confused. Brian was inconsolable, crying and holding his newborn son in his arms. Brian and his family are overjoyed to see Jessica alive again. The medical team rushed in and began working to revive her, and after a few tense moments, Jessica's eyes fluttered open. The doctors examine her and the baby and find that both are perfectly healthy. Overwhelmed with gratitude and joy, Brian and their families thanked God for answering their prayers and giving them back Jessica. Within 24 hours, the ventilator was removed and she was able to breathe on her own again. Later that night, her husband came into the room to see her, and it was an emotional reunion. Although Jessica doesn't remember most of what happened, when her husband relived the moments, she was amazed and grateful to everyone who took the time to pray for her. 2 weeks later, the little family was ready to leave the hospital. Jessica cradled their newborn son, whom they decided to name Ian, meaning, "The Lord is my God." symbolizing the miracle they had witnessed. Brian held Anna's hand as they made their way to the car, feeling the weight of gratitude heavy on his shoulders. At home, Anna and Max had been anxiously waiting. Anna, with her little face pressed against the window, couldn't contain her excitement when she saw her parents approaching. Max, sensing the joy in the air, wagged his tail energetically. As Brian opened the door, Anna rushed out, wanting to introduce herself to her new baby brother. "Is this my brother, Mommy?" she asked with sparkling eyes. "Yes, sweetie. This is Ian, your baby brother," Jessica replied softly. Brian suddenly remembered the day it all began. "You know, Jess," he mused with a slight chuckle, "I can't help but think back to that sandwich Max stole from you." Jessica laughed. "That mischievous little sandwich thief. Who would have thought that stolen sandwich would lead us to all of this?" So, what do you guys think? Was it all God's plan? Life can be unpredictable, often presenting us with challenges when we least expect them. During such moments of despair and hopelessness, it is our faith and trust in a higher power that can bring about miracles. Even in our darkest moments, there might be a bigger plan at work. Let us know in the comments below. How does your faith in God guide you during challenging times? If you liked the video, make sure to give a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. Take care, and see you in next one.